I wanted to ask Carlos, Robin and Judith to make a few comments, and Carlos is in a state where 1 in 7 people have been infected. So I was going to ask him to begin by just talking about inequality in Arizona, but I do know that there is another point he wants to make. Carlos.
Thank you. Very, very, very briefly, we really do live in a transborder world in this section of the United States. And so all of the structural inequalities of a border region are present and distributed on both sides of the border. So for example, the density of population on the Mexican side of the border, because of the maquiladoras, that is the plants themselves that are owned by American companies as well as other foreign companies, then create a density of populations for which, in fact, that particular part of the border is not ready in many ways. And then on the U.S. side of the border, you have the distribution of the same kinds of employment that, in fact, lead to disadvantages of all sorts. So, in a nutshell, we have a very heterogeneous situation, as well compounded. For example, we have indigenous populations that live in the northern part of Arizona as well, in less dense situations, but because of ritual activities and so on, they come together, and so therefore the pandemic rates increase. But they're also able then to organize themselves against the pandemia in very functional ways. So we live in a very complex system, and in order to deal with that complex system, especially linguistically, then colleagues of mine have been able to, in fact, generate the kinds of communication that are important for the communities in Zapotec, English, and Spanish. Zapotec, because an awful lot of people don't recognize, is that we have a very large number of Mexican indigenous migrants who live in the United States from California through New Mexico to Arizona as well as on the Mexican side, for example, in the Ensenada area of Baja California. So this very complex system then requires complex linguistic responses. And Lenore is going to be putting on an example that, in fact, that was done by my colleague, Dr. Gilberto Lopez, who's a brand new assistant professor and absolutely wonderful. The sound's not on, Lenore. Lenore, the sound's not on. Unmute yourself.
Sorry.
These various representations, in fact, were created by Gilberto, as well as with a media company. And what is really interesting, of course, is they're very culturally competent. They speak to very specific cultural notions of illness, as well as the negative roles that some members of the community play in either not getting tested or not getting the vaccine. So these are very highly culturally competent ways in which to communicate to a very diverse population. And by the way, to my colleague, Professor Saldana Tejada, these are available for you as well to be able to utilize in whatever way that you would wish to use these. And they're very effective because all the characters that you see on the screen are Mexican characters. In other words, the males are represented with a mustache, not unlike mine, less cheesy than mine, but and darker as well. And the women are presented both in professional roles as well as in domestic roles. So you have this very interesting gender specific kind of message that's also provided, in that women are highly responsible for not only inoculations but also for testing. So they're very culturally congruent in Zapoteca, Spanish, and English.
Fantastic. Robin, would you like to say a few words about applied anthropology and the role of applied anthropology, or the windows that we've opened up even today in talking about these issues? And then Judith, I'm going to ask you to speak.
Thanks, Lenore. Look, I would just like to congratulate all the authors on this project. When the pandemic sort of hit us back in March of last year, I really despaired. I despaired of top-down decisions. I despaired of health-dominated discourse with no attention to people. Mental health wasn't on the radar, for instance. Domestic violence wasn't on the radar. And I wrote a little provocation at that stage for the Society for Applied Anthropology's newsletter, in which I said, you know, can anthropologists speak up here? Can we actually shift the discourse to be about people, not about diseases? Can we actually speak truth to power? And can we do what we're best at, which is, I think, putting the voices of people at the center of policy and understanding that all of the inequity and oppression and disadvantage and horrible things that have come through are socially created, which means they are created by people and they can be uncreated by people. And by revealing these inequities and what's behind them, I think applied anthropologists can play an incredibly important role in our society in showing alternatives and new ways of seeing the world and new ways of responding to crises like COVID. So I've been really inspired by what everyone has to say here. And I think I also feel a little bit vindicated because, as Judith said at the beginning, 4 of us got together over a year ago and we said, we think that applied anthropologists should work together more across boundaries, across national boundaries, across language boundaries, because if we did that, we would be inspired by each other, we would learn more, and we would be even more powerful at changing the world. And I think this group tonight has been a wonderful case study in how applied anthropologists working together across borders can really say something of great importance to policy and practice. And I'd like to think that our Society for Applied Anthropology and our SFAA Global Project can support that into the future. So thanks and congratulations to you all. And I'll hand it over to Judy.
Thank you, Robin. And you've read my mind. I also congratulate everybody and each one of you. Just quickly, I'd like to clarify in which way I said earlier how the pandemic has been, the public health issue has been politicized. I thank Andrea Schumann for a comment reminding us that public health is not only scientific but political. But like Abril Saldaña, I noticed that like in Mexico and Argentina, scientists and academics that support the populist government currently in Argentina would just support their political views and support the figures that they disseminate with the population. And this is something that we applied social scientists should also monitor, because we're also part of that population. In terms specifically of how the pandemic is impacting Argentina, access has been politicized as the government controls who gets the vaccines, which vaccines, and when they get it. And Argentina is the country with the largest gap between vaccinations. A lot of people get vaccinated with the first doses, and then there's been spaces of like 5 months between one doses and the other. And because the government is the only provider, you have absolutely no power. You just have to sit and wait. Thanks again for this wonderful conversation.
Okay, then we are really wrapping up. There is an SFAA conference in March next year, and we will be organising things for SFAA Global. We have everybody who's still online, we have your email addresses. So we'll be writing to you all to encourage some of you to participate in that, as well as to participate further in these kinds of webinars. There is a web page, and some of you will have seen the Facebook page, the LinkedIn page, the SFAA global page, and we'll make sure that this is not the last time that we talk to each other. I'm hoping that we follow on from the very brief discussion that Carlos introduced about accessing people whose language is not first language is not English, and that's something that we've also all been working on. Io and Nancy, you have been the three of us have worked on this book at fast pace. So today's webinar and the speed of it gives you an idea of what it was like to work with three of us, to the patient authors who are still here. Do either of you want to say something before we close?
Very quickly, just to say thank you to all the contributors, and I just leave you with a parting image. So in Denmark, and I'm sure every country has a similar version of this, when the pandemic started and lockdowns were announced, there was this panel, the prime minister flanked by XXX, right? And what a book like this should, you know, as if we need any more convincing, but should convince our politicians, is that you should be flanked by an anthropologist alongside the virologist and alongside the epidemiologist. And, you know, there's no more discussion. This book is evidence. I mean, without going into the politics of knowledge production, this is evidence. This is anthropological evidence that needs to inform policy. So, you know, our politicians need to understand that it's not an either or if question. It's absolutely one of necessity. So I'll leave you with that parting image. And thank you to
Nancy. Nancy.
Thank you, Io. What a great image. I also just want to say, what a small world, because it's my student's father is doing the Zapotec translations for Gilberto's animations. So I've been collaborating with Gilberto on that initiative, because where my university is a incredibly diverse and under-resourced region in California. So that was super exciting to hear. But I think that I just want to say a couple of words about how I think that today's discussion and our book really captures the lens of anthropology and the value of both long-term ethnographic engagement, as well as the ability to pivot and use rapid methods to engage in this kind of urgent initiative. And I think the discussion has really highlighted the range of state level and individual responses, as well as the stratification of economic and health effects, and the ways in which non-state actors have also taken advantage of the crisis to either reimpose gendered and paternalistic norms, and at others to create opportunities for change. And it's been extremely exciting to hear people discuss that. But it's also really, to me, illustrated the care and passion that both the scholars and their interlocutors have for their work, and as well as the challenges that we face as anthropologists to reflect on our own roles and our complicity with many of the power-laden processes that have been discussed. So I guess my one positive point is that I feel like the discussion today really maps an agenda for transnational and global anthropology, including, as Io beautifully pointed out, the importance of engaging productively in policy.
Okay, thank you. I've got two things to do. One is to thank Melissa Cope, who's been sitting on the side, and I should have actually let her deal with the video clips, Carlos, and we wouldn't have had that problem from me. But thank you, Melissa. Thank you, SFAA Global, for hosting it, because it was a big task. Thank you, all of you who have stayed on for 2.5 hours. It has been fantastic. The other thing is, please download and share the download, because the more people who download the book for free, the more likely this model of publishing and sharing with the rest of the world will become entrenched and taken for granted. And that's one of the things that we are proudest of. So everybody, thank you so much. And it's good night from me.